argument I want to make to you today is that for many reasons, Russian leaders have a strategic imagination. They just think differently and more strategically than anyone else, okay? And so the example I want to use is Joseph Stalin, because we actually know a lot about Joseph Stalin. All right, so let's look at the world in 1939. And in 1939, there are about 6 global powers, okay? There's Soviet Union, okay? There's Japan. There's United States. There's UK, Britain, the British Empire, Germany, and France. Okay? So this is the map of the world in 1939. Now, let's talk about each country. The United States is far away and it's neutral. It does not like to get involved in the affairs of Europe. But it's suffering from the Great Depression. Its economy has collapsed. Okay? Japan, the Japanese Empire, is a war machine. But the problem for Japan is that it is completely reliant on imports. Okay? It needs oil for its empire, its war machine. And there are only 2 sources of oil close by. There's the Soviet Union Far East, and then there's Southeast Asia. Okay? Now, Japan is getting most of its oil from the United States. But the United States is angry at Japan. Why is the United States angry at Japan? Do you guys know?
Invading China.
Exactly, okay, because Japan invaded China. And the United States doesn't want that, okay? So it's very likely that the United States will eventually cut off all exports to Japan. And so Japan has a choice. You can either invade here or you can invade here. But those are your 2 choices, okay? That's Japan. You can either invade the Soviet Union or Southeast Asia. Okay, the Soviet Union is a communist country. And for the past 20, 30 years, it's been trying extremely hard to industrialize. But it's hard to industrialize because, first of all, no one wants to trade with the Soviet Union, okay? So they can't get any resources. The Soviet Union is still very much an agricultural nation. And the Soviet Union doesn't really have that much technology and expertise, okay? It doesn't really have that much human capital. So the Soviet Union, it's a huge country. It's the world's largest country. It's an empire. But in terms of manufacturing and technology, it's behind the West, okay? Now, in Europe, there are 3 nations. You have France, Germany, and the UK. The UK is an empire. Okay, it has colonies all around the world. Germany lost World War I, and so it has to pay all these reparations to UK and France. Okay? And now Hitler is in power, and Hitler is determined to reunite Germany, okay? Because Germany lost a lot of land because of World War I, okay? So he wants to reunite Greater Germany, okay? That's his ambition. It's not to conquer the world, it's to reunite Germany. All right? And then you have France, which is the weakest of all these powers, but it still has an empire. Okay? So, looking at a map in 1939, and we use game theory, what should be happening, or what should happen maybe 5 years from now, 1945, okay? Let's use game theory to map out what should be happening, or what will happen, given this map. And given the individual players, the interests of these different nations. What do you expect to happen? Who does everyone hate? Who does everyone hate? Who does everyone want to go invade? Why? Why does everyone want to invade the Soviet Union? Okay, yes, first of all, it has a lot of resources, and it's not that strong, okay? That's the first reason. But there's actually a better reason why everyone wants to attack the Soviet Union. Why? What's happening internally in the United States right now? The Great Depression. What ideology is a threat to the American government? Communism, okay, do you understand? So there's a global communist movement in the 1930s. That's very, very powerful. In fact, in the 1930s, and you guys don't know this, but America was on the brink of revolution, okay? The communists could have any time took over America if America failed to stop the economic bleeding that was happening, all right? So everyone was afraid of communism. Japan would have loved to invade Soviet Union because Japan hates communism, and Soviet Union has a lot of oil, right? So here comes Japan. Germany would love to destroy the Soviet Union because Nazis hated who the most? Who did Nazis hate who the most? Why did they hate Jews? What did Hitler believe about Jews?
He thought they controlled the world economy.
Okay, they control the world economy, but there's actually a better reason why he hated Jews. What's the problem with Jews? Okay, you guys don't know this, but they were all communists, okay? Hitler thought that all Jews were communists. So Hitler hated, first and foremost, communism, okay? Nazism hated communism the most. So Hitler wanted to invade the Soviet Union. How about France in the UK? How about France in the UK? What did they want to do? Who did they hate? Russia, right? Soviet Union. United States? Sure, why not? Okay, do you understand? So 1945, if we use game theory, okay, we should have expected that the Soviet Union would have been partitioned into different countries, okay? These powers would have invaded the country together and colonized the Soviet Union and destroyed the threat of global communism once and for all, okay? Does that make sense? But that's not what happened, right? That's not what happened. What happened was that in 1939, Hitler invaded Poland, okay? And the moment that Hitler invaded Poland, France and Britain declared war on Germany. And then Germany defeated France and Britain, okay? Britain was forced to return to its island, but Churchill refused to seek peace with Hitler. In fact, Hitler tried to seek peace with Churchill 7 times. And each time, Churchill was like, go to hell. We're going to fight this war till the end. Why was Churchill so angry at Hitler? What happened? Because Germany destroyed the British army, right? It's a complete loss of face for the British Empire. So Churchill was very, very angry at Hitler, and Churchill refused to ever negotiate with Hitler. In fact, Hitler sent this emissary called Rudolf Hess to Britain, to Scotland, to negotiate a truce, and Churchill just put him in prison. Okay? But what's the irony of all this? Germany invades Poland. What does Germany invade Poland? Do you guys know? Have you guys studied this history? Okay, it's because of something called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So this was an agreement between the Soviet Union and Germany to partition Poland into 2. Do you understand? So Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland together. The Soviet Union attacked from the east, and the Germans attacked from the west. But what happened was Britain and France declared war on Germany, but not the Soviet Union, okay? That's pretty clever of Stalin, don't you think? In fact, you can make the argument that if this thing was not signed, Hitler would not have attacked Poland, okay? And the reason why is, the other thing about this pact is that Soviet Union agreed to give Germany resources for its war machine, oil and food and other inputs, okay? Does that make sense? Because remember, the Soviet Union has the Ukraine, which produces a lot of food and oil, okay? Does that make sense? All right? Next thing that happened was that in June 1941, Operation Barbarossa. So Hitler invades the Soviet Union, okay? And if you read history, anyone will tell you that this Operation Barbarossa was a tremendous success for Germany and a strategic failure for the Soviet Union. It was a grave mistake, strategic blunder for Stalin, okay? What did Stalin do wrong? Well, first of all, he refused to defend the border. Okay? There were 4 to 5 million Soviet troops at the border defending the Soviet Union, but they were given direct orders given direct orders not to provoke the Germans. You understand? If the Germans fire at you, don't fire back. And because of this order, the German army, which was about 3 to 4 million, was able to overrun the border and almost reach Moscow. Okay? That was a grave mistake on the part of Stalin. Second is that Stalin ignored intelligence. Okay? There was a lot of intelligence that said that Germany was going to invade the Soviet Union. How could you hide the fact that you have 4 million troops assembled to attack the Soviet Union, okay? So there's a lot of intelligence going to Stalin and telling Stalin, hey, the Germans are coming. And Stalin said, nope, I refuse to believe this intelligence. In fact, you had German soldiers desert the German army, swim across the river to the Soviet side and tell the Soviets, hey, my comrades, the entire army is about to attack you. And the Soviets shot these German soldiers because they thought these German soldiers were spies. Okay? So Stalin ignored intelligence. The third thing that Stalin did was, before the outbreak of war, he purged the Red Army, the Soviet army, of its leadership of generals. Okay? So the top generals of the Soviet army, the Red Army, were all dead or in prison because Stalin got rid of them for not being politically loyal enough. Okay? But the fourth thing is, why did Stalin do this? And the answer is, what historians will tell you is that Stalin trusted Hitler. Okay? This was the ultimate mistake that Stalin made. Stalin believed Hitler was his friend. He believed that Hitler would never invade him. Okay? And so this is what you're taught in history class. When you go to the United States, you'll be taught this. When you go on the internet, you'll be taught this, okay? This is completely wrong. This analysis is completely wrong. All right? So we're going to use game theory to understand why this is wrong. All right. So using game theory, let's look at 4 possible scenarios, okay? Scenario A is Soviets attack first, and they encircle Berlin. Second scenario is Soviets attack, okay, and they're stopped at the border. Scenario C is Germans attack, and the Soviets stop them. Okay? And scenario D is Germans attack, and they reach Moscow. Okay? Which is actually what happened. All right? So these are 4 possible different scenarios that could have happened in June 1941. All right? Remember that there were 4 to 5 million Soviet troops at the border. Okay? What were they doing there? They were about to attack Germany. The Soviets had a plan to attack Germany. But the Germans struck first. Okay? So let's look at these 4 possible scenarios and see what happens. First scenario is the Soviets attack Germany first and they reach Berlin. What happens now? What happens now? What do all the other countries do? Yes, do you understand? Stalin reaches Berlin, boom, Japan comes from the east. Britain comes to the aid of Germany, the United States comes to the aid of Britain. All the world unites against the Soviet Union. Okay? So what would happen in this war? The Soviet Union loses this war. Do you understand? Okay? Now let's look at B. The Soviets invade, but the Germans stop them at the border. Okay? Now what happens? Now what happens? Yeah, so Japan still invades, okay? And Britain starts to negotiate with Germany and seek a peace. Because Britain cannot afford for the Soviet Union to overrun Germany because then communism takes over Europe. Does that make sense? Okay? So in B, we can't say that the Soviet Union would lose, but they would not win the war. Okay? You understand? So B is not that good either. Now let's look at C. The Germans attack, and the Soviets hold them at the border. Now what happens? Now what happens? They just destroy each other, right? The United States, Britain, Japan, they're all laughing. They're like, oh, they're just killing each other. Who cares? Not a problem, okay? But now let's look at situation D, where the Germans attack and they are about to destroy the Soviet Union. What happens now? The other countries have to come and help the Soviet Union. Why? Why is it the United States and Britain must come to help the Soviet Union? Why? What would happen if Germany takes over the Soviet Union? That's right, okay? They take over the resources, therefore they take over the world. You understand? Because Germany has technology, it has military power, but it lacks resources. You combine the resources with the German military, they're invincible now. The United States will be forever shut out of the world. Germany will not invade the United States, but the United States could never ever attack Germany again. Does that make sense? So what happens is, after the Soviets invade, after the Germans invade and the Soviet army is destroyed, America immediately gives the Soviet Union a lot of aid, okay? It's what we call Lend-Lease. From 1941 to 1945, America gave $200 billion to the Soviet Union for free, okay? It gave weapons, resources, technology, and food. Basically, what America did was industrialize the Soviet Union. Does that make sense? That's what America did. The Soviet Union could not industrialize by itself, but America helped the Soviet Union to industrialize. Let's look at Lend-Lease, okay? Weapons. America gave the Soviet Union 1/3 of all ammunition used in the war. 1/3 of all explosives. 1/2 of all aircraft. 14,000 airplanes. 1/2 of all tanks. 13,000 tanks. Okay? Resources. America gave oil and food. 80% of all copper. 55% of aluminum and steel. Okay? Technology. America gave the Soviet Union radio technology, radio communications, railroad, transportation, heavy industry, and lots of food. Okay? In other words, America basically built the Soviet Union in heavy industry for it. Okay? Does that make sense? And also, at the end of the day, what the Soviet Union can do is reverse engineer all this technology and build its own industry. Does that make sense? Okay? So Lend-Lease really turned the Soviet Union into a superpower. And Stalin could get all this for free because America could not afford for the Soviet Union to lose the war. Okay? What's the other benefit of having the Germans attack first and almost destroy Moscow? What's the other benefit? And Stalin really needed this. This is actually more important than Lend-Lease, which is what? National unity, right? Now all the Soviets were united in the fight against Nazi Germany. Before, communism was tearing the country apart. There was a civil war. The rich people all fled the country, right? But now, because the Germans were invading, the entire country was united against Germany. This is what they call the Great Patriotic War. They were fighting this war for the love of their country, the love of Mother Russia. Okay? So, and what turned the war was the will to fight. The Russians lost 26 million people in the war. That's a lot of people. But by losing this many people, it made the entire nation refuse to surrender. They had the will to fight, okay? Much more so than the Germans. Does that make sense? Okay? So in history, you're taught that Operation Barbarossa proved that Stalin was not a strategic genius, that he was played by Hitler. But if you just do game theory analysis, this was the best possible outcome for the Soviet Union, okay? In 1939, the world should have united against the Soviet Union, but what happened was the world united against Nazi Germany and gave Soviet Union the technology, the money, and the resources to become a global superpower, right? Does it make sense? And because Soviet Union became a global superpower, it was able to turn China into a communist country. Does that make sense? If the Soviet Union did not become a global superpower with all this heavy industry,